Well, I'd like to thank ICEJ for having me here. Almost 20 years ago, I was living in Jerusalem. This was at the tail end of the Second Intifada, and I would come to the Jerusalem March, and never in a million years would I have thought that in 20 years I'd be on this stage. So, Jürgen, thank you so much for everything, and for your guys' team is amazing. When I looked over the speaker list, many of the names and people on this list are people that have been theological and spiritual heroes of mine. And so I owe a deep debt of gratitude to many people in this room. When I received my prompt this week, I must admit I was somewhat at a loss when I got the topic. And what I mean is this: if you're sitting in this room and you've come here to Israel in the midst of wartime, what can I tell you about anti-Semitism that you don't already know? I write in my book that anti-Semitism is like a train that always arrives on time. It is the invisible spiritual war breaking out into the visible realm. It is the unceasing work of the devil and all the lesser gods who try to make the true God a liar. And far too often, men go along with this demonic impulse. Modern anti-Semitism is like a chameleon. Whatever hate you have in your heart, the Jew can fit into that heart-shaped hole. The Jew is a capitalist to the communist, a communist to the fascist, a socialist to the capitalist, a virus to the racist, a colonial settler to the liberal, a globalist to the nationalist, a Christ killer to the Christian, a land stealer to the Arab, always and forever at the center of all conspiracy. Never mind that these are all wildly contradictory pictures. They are useful to those who need a scapegoat. So in hopes of narrowing down such a vast topic, I want to evaluate anti-Semitism through three lenses: the church, the new media landscape, and Gen Z. The focus in each one of these areas is going to be on Gen Z. Now, I want to start with the church. In my view, this is always where we should look first. We should never be surprised at cultural darkness. Darkness is the default. As Jesus warned in Matthew 5, the blame for darkness lies in the church's inability to reflect God's light, in our inability to preserve the culture. In March of this year, the Cultural Research Center produced a study on confessing Christians in America and their willingness to act as salt and light in the earth. Essentially, they were looking to see how well is a biblical worldview holding up in culture. I probably don't need to tell you this, but the results were abysmal. The study ranked 8 different categories of Christian life, things like the Bible, truth, morals, God, creation, lifestyle, behavior. What they discovered is that biblical alignment is strikingly low across all worldview categories, and the drop-off is cataclysmic in America's youngest generations. With biblical perspectives in 6 of the 8 essential worldview categories not coming above 5%. Overall, the weakest areas where biblical alignment was found in the areas of marriage, abortion, sanctity of life, and moral behaviors and relationships. In other words, the easiest things. So what does this mean for me if I'm concerned about Israel? If I can't get someone to acknowledge moral absolutes regarding abortion, do you think I'm going to be able to convince them about just war theory in Gaza or Iran? If I can't get someone to accept a biblical anthropology or a cosmology, do you think I'm going to have success convincing them about the God who works through history in regards to the Jewish people in Israel? If I can't get someone to accept the idea that nations and land are God-inspired ideas and good creations, do you think I'm ever going to be able to convince them that the modern state of Israel is a good idea? In other words, we are losing the cultural conversation long before we get to the issue of Zionism. I want to offer one other strategic observation by the Cultural Research Center. They view the greatest way to close this cultural gap is by fixing the failings of our spiritual leaders, particularly pastors, professors, parents, and theologians. Now, what failures, you might ask? Well, it's not that the church is not full of bodies or the seminary is full of students. Podcasts, books, media, they're all being produced at the highest rate on record. But none of it has any teeth. The majority of this content does not address an orthodox biblical worldview. The issue is that we are afraid to offend. We have no true north. We are afraid to influence in opposition to the culture. It is not culturally advantageous to stand for truth. I frequently hear from pastors that they are afraid to talk about Israel. It offers no cultural benefit to wade into this controversy. So what does Jesus say about the salt? He says that if it loses its ability to preserve and flavor, then it will be thrown out and trampled upon. And trampled upon. Is it any surprise that we're being trampled upon on certain issues right now? A final observation as it relates to Gen Z is that there has been a resurgence of interest in church history and in older liturgical and apostolic traditions. The reason for this is that much of the world feels like it's crumbling. So when sands are shifting and the winds are whipping, people look for things that feel ancient and stable. What are the institutions that have stood the test of time? Gen Z is not concerned about the latest fads or trends. They want a true spiritual inheritance. They want rootedness. Now, this offers both opportunities and challenges for us. The challenges as it relates to Zionism and the Jewish people is that the historical church has often been blind to God's ongoing work with the Jewish people. So naturally, when Gen Z looks into the past, what they find on this issue is not always pleasant. Yet to communicate with Gen Z effectively, we have to be willing to engage with church history and find ways to tell our side of the story on this issue. We can have a different position, but we need to be able to articulate the reason why and frame our belief in the larger picture of the church. In our current climate, it would be catastrophic to not take this challenge seriously. Our story cannot be that we are the bright progressives or the smart moderns and that we don't need to evaluate what we believe through church history. If that is our message to Gen Z, it will be seen as postmodern nonsense and it will be rejected. But the opportunity is that we have an age-old story to tell. When it comes to the Jewish people in Israel, this story is an ancient memorial to the faithfulness of God. We need to tell the story in a way that helps Gen Z connect to their spiritual inheritance through the eyes of the ancient church. Now let's talk about the new media landscape. Back in 2009, we launched these events called Palestinian Human Rights Week. We would go on to colleges, Berkeley, MIT, Toronto University, really wonderful places, and debate who was really at fault for the Palestinian suffering. Back then, the opposition was always on the political left. Every conversation about Israel was always related to the understandable concern for the Palestinians and who was responsible for this suffering. But moral clarity regarding America and Israel's role in the world was never a question back then. This reality has drastically shifted over the last 3 years. I'm sure that many in this room, like myself, have been astonished at how quickly the winds have changed. Depending on the day, the news brings us a never-ending stream of some new horror and atrocity that we should lay at the feet of the Jews in Israel. We are seeing both medieval and modern forms of anti-Semitism daily trotted out for our viewing pleasure. Where in the world would we be without the hard-hitting reporting from New York Times reporter Nicholas Kristof informing us that the IDF is now training dogs to rape Palestinians? This shocking and baseless new fantasy brought by the New York Times, continuing in their hard-worked effort to only bring us the news fit to print. If you are on the political right, Israel has become the major issue that is dividing America and many other nations. These apex media figures are using this to divide all these nations, and this has been very disorienting and distressing for many on the right. Now, this new form of attack against Israel and the Jews is in the accusation of outsized political influence and global conspiracy. And it turns out that there are more than enough hucksters and grifters that eat this up. So on the left, we have the medieval variety of anti-Semitism with blood libel and subhuman statements regularly made about the Jews. And on the right, we now have political and conspiratorial juggernaut that is forming, and culture is being crushed on both sides. In Arthur Cohen's book, Warrant for Genocide, he notes the need for something he calls the cosmic conspiracy, to really animate a society in a genocidal way. I love that term, cosmic conspiracy. This new form of messaging on the right that is directed towards the Jews in Israel fits this definition of the cosmic conspiracy. It is the grand unifying theme for all the evil in the world. The banks, the sexual perversions, the world governments, AIPAC, Mossad, the Jews have their greedy little paws in everything. So this lie goes. Don't bother presenting facts or evidence. When has reality ever gotten in the way of a good conspiracy? Now, the data bears this out. In a recent survey by the Yale Youth Poll, the nation's largest survey of young adults, 55% of respondents between the ages of 18 and 22 agreed that America should end its slavish surrender to Israel, its wars, and its demand for foreign aid. Additionally, just 24% of young Americans think that Israel should exist as a Jewish state. That's cataclysmic for the future. The right has become deeply soaked in this cosmic conspiracy perspective. This perspective is like an intellectual parasite that eats its host from inside out. The obsession with the Jews is a brain rot, and this does not bode well for the West. As Jordan Peterson notes, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine. As go the Jews, so goes your society. I would point to France, Britain, and Canada as examples for anyone willing to open their eyes. Now, much of this perspective is artificially boosted as well. The insufferable left-wing darling, Hassan Piker, if you guys are not familiar with him, consider yourselves fortunate, recently said what everyone already knows, that most of these organizations have funding from China, Qatar, and Russia. The same can be said for money flowing in on the right. I know firsthand that many of these quote-unquote Christian podcasters who are violently anti-Israel are receiving foreign funding. So what we are watching is not organic, but the damage it is doing is very real. But we already know what the future will be for those who choose to antagonize the people that God has chosen to tie his name to. All these voices have done is ensure that their names will be blotted out from the historical record. As Rabbi Lichtenstein poetically said, he said this 100 years ago, 1,000-fold of active evil forces have joined themselves to the destroying elements of time to make a complete end of the Jewish race. Malice, error, simplicity, and envy have all raged to uproot Israel from among the nations. And God did not keep silent. He did not keep still. For all of these raging enemies of God were destroyed by the streams of time because mere earthly might or sword has no power over the spirit. So whenever Gen Z tries to tell me about a Jewish conspiracy to rule the world, I tell them that I already believe that a Jewish king rules the world, and of his kingdom there will be no end. Now, this leads us to the makeup of Gen Z. They are the most digitally connected generation we have ever known. If there is one attribute that could define Gen Z, it would be saturation. They are more saturated and overwhelmed with digital stimulation than any other generation. What this means is that what they value more than anything is originality and uniqueness. They are constantly flooded with what to think and how to be, which has the result of making them want to walk away from all of it, which, if we were honest, is probably the same thing that we would do. Where in past generations we might have dyed our hair, gotten a mohawk, danced in public, whatever it is you did to counterculture, Gen Z has to navigate that impulse while being flooded with information on what to think. In this climate, Tucker, Candace, and Fuentes all look like countercultural beacons. We can add to this that Gen Z has the highest segment of mental health issues, depression, social anxiety, and existential dread. It turns out that maybe giving young adults an endless stream of information and dopamine hits without spiritually forming them first was maybe not the best way to raise a generation. Now, when it comes to the issue of Israel and Zionism more broadly, it is decidedly not cool to be a Zionist. And you might say, who cares about being cool? Well, we all cared about being cool up until a certain point. So to Gen Z, who sees Zionism as a neocon boomer political philosophy, it is radioactive. For Gen Z, being counterculture means rejecting Zionism, at least at this cultural inflection point. Now, the prevalence of anti-Semitic sentiment on social media has also normalized these views. The Yale Youth Poll found that people who get their news from social media are more likely to hold anti-Semitic views because the timeline and algorithms reinforce the idea that it is normal to hate the Jewish people. Yet at the same time, it is very possible that on a long enough timeline, Gen Z might see through all of this and find their footing like we all have. So what can we do about it? A crisis regarding left and the West is the collapse of the intergenerational connection. Young people retreating into the online spaces, older Americans into their silos. This generational fracture is deeper than any time in history, and this creates a very acute problem. What this means is that we are failing to transmit a proper cultural inheritance to the next generation. As every day passes, we become more disconnected from each other. Ironically, this is not something that Gen Z says that they want. They want to be instructed, they want to have meaning, they want to be formed, they want to see a world that makes room for them. They want authentic connection with the ones that came before them. This is not a radical demand, this is an ancient desire. Hannah Arendt wrote about what she calls the thread of tradition, the living connection between generations that allow a society to transmit its values and renew itself. This is how we preserve culture. When this thread breaks, people become untethered from both the past and the future. and this thread is fraying. So this is my first challenge to you. Are you transmitting the past that you have diligently fought for? Many in this room have been the tip of the spear to this ancient but new work of God regarding the Jewish people. You have been the ones that have tilled the soil of the enduring plan of God after the creation of the modern state of Israel. Now, I've had the chance to visit many Christian pro-Israel events over the last year, and by and large, everyone is over 60. This is not a criticism. I'm not trying to reject that. I'm trying to figure out how do we bring this together. I crave the wisdom of those who have come before me, as I know many young people do. So I would simply encourage you, do not underestimate how much holy war you can make recreating yourself in another person. You can't rival Tucker's media empire. You probably can't control the decisions of the global church, but you can transmit what you know to the people coming behind you. Are you a pastor, a nonprofit leader, a scholar, a parent? Have you transmitted what you know and what you believe, the flame that you carry, to the people behind you? One of the most strategic things we can do right now is secure the base, and that requires you transmitting your flame to the people that are coming behind you. This is my second challenge to you. Do not let your voice or light go out with the challenges that are coming. Courage is the rarest of the virtues. C.S. Lewis famously said, he described courage not as a separate virtue, but as the form of every virtue at its testing point. Courage is who you are when the pressure is on. When it comes to the church, the Jewish people in Israel, we are in a completely different time than we were 3 years ago. There was a Jerusalem Post article that came out a few weeks ago that was lamenting the reality that is now receiving frequent requests for past authors of the Post to have their names scrubbed from their articles. It is no longer acceptable to be associated with Zionism publicly. So the hope for the remnant has never been in our chariots, nor our large armies. When David went out to Goliath, it wasn't Saul's army or his armor that protected David. For those with the right perspective, this is an exciting moment, a moment where we get to be tested, a moment where we get to stand against giants. There is honor in being given such a moment. All great warriors yearn for days like these. How fortunate are we that we can be manning the wall at such an important time in God's story. So I leave you with this. Hazak, hazak, venetzia zak. Be strong, and may we be strengthened.